Hello, everybody. Thank you for watching our recording here of our Career Spotlight for Career Friday at Kendall College and Career Academy. So with me here today, I have my good friend, Katharine Morris. She is a scholar activist for environmental justice and is currently a candidate pursuing a master's in public policy. So thank you for joining us here today, Katharine. I very much appreciate it. So I wanted to know a little bit more about what it is that you are currently doing. I know that you are in school for your master's in public policy. Do you think you could explain a little bit about what public policy means?
Yeah, for sure, because that's kind of something that people don't talk about, although public policy very much runs our lives in ways that we don't really address, right? It's not the type of profession that you hear about on television, but basically a policy is any written rule that can be set into place, whether it be at your job, at your school, whether it be a college or a high school such as yours, or turned into state statute, right? So when you have a bill proposed by a legislator, if that gets signed into law, it's now a law. But these are all aspects of public policy. These are different dimensions of public policy. And it's unfortunate that people aren't more aware of it and aware of how they can contribute to it, because it affects your lives in more ways than you think about. In terms of environmentalism, that can look like how recycling policy or trash incineration policies, or even your access to grocery stores, all those things are shaped by different policies in different ways.
Awesome. And we also talked a little bit, so we just learned a little bit about the greenhouse effect in our classes, and we were talking about greenhouse gas emissions from different factories and all that kind of stuff. Is there ways that your work can kind of help fight against those greenhouse gas emissions in some way?
Yeah, so in terms of when it comes to trash incineration, it's really problematic in the sense that when you have a large incinerator, it takes all your trash and it'll burn it to get rid of it, essentially. But while it's doing that, it's emitting toxins into the air that are similar to greenhouse gases, or they're not, well, they are greenhouse gases, but they're not like carbon monoxide, but they are things like your ppms that have a certain level of concentration that we then ingest, right? We inhale it as we live nearby it, particularly if you live in closer proximity to an incinerator. And those are really bad for your health. And so health equity, so making sure that everyone has the equal chance to be as healthy as possible in every way, in terms of what they're able to eat, the air they're breathing, and their access to medical care. All those things factor into what we call health equity. And so right now, I currently work at a nonprofit called Health Equity Solutions. So we do a lot of policy around advancing health equity. One thing that's important for me in terms of environmental justice is the creation and sustainability of policies that address the fact that your different emissions can affect your health negatively. And there are a lot of dynamics of injustice in terms of whose health is being affected more likely than others.
Yeah. Yeah, we talked a little bit about that and how communities that live closer to trash incinerators and factories like that, they often struggle or face a lot of the health consequences of living so close to, in proximity to those pollutants, right? So,
and
yeah.
unfortunately, there are very specific groups of people that tend to live in those areas, right? So I recently saw this graphic that was kind of startling, but it essentially showed that within 2.5 miles of an incinerator, specifically incinerators in Connecticut, the majority of individuals are Black or Latinx, right? So that's a form of health inequities. It's a form of environmental racism, which is the opposite of environmental justice. Like we don't want that to be the case anymore. But unfortunately, it's the case, and it produces high rates of asthma, high rates of different cancers, and other health defects that nobody wants, right? It's
Right.
also been an issue in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic and making people more likely to be infected by and unfortunately hospitalized or even die from COVID-19.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I think, do you think that policy work is the best way to fight those injustices and that history of racism, of
Yeah.
environmental racism?
I wouldn't say the best way per se, because I don't think there's any one way to be an activist. Like,
Mm-hmm.
for instance, I consider myself a scholar activist. I plan on developing a career on using my work and my degrees that I pursue in academia to help further environmental justice. So right now, that's me getting my master's in public policy and working on kind of that end of things and really trying to familiarize myself better with the process of policy making and what it takes to get a bill passed. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and how we can keep track of whether or not that policy is working, because it's unfortunately sometimes things don't work, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
policies are based off of just ideas that people have. I can write a policy. Anyone sitting in the room watching this recording can grow up and propose policies or legislation. You can, even right now with your parents, you can sit down and write a testimony either in favor of or against a policy that's being proposed that might infect you, or your peers. The thing is, sometimes not everyone agrees on ideas, but also sometimes you can just be misguided. So policy evaluation is a really important part of it, which is something else that I want to study. I do want to get my PhD, which is like a doctorate. It's when you're a doctor but you're not a medical doctor. Basically, to have my expertise in how to really advance environmental justice using the different background that I have in anthropology and cognitive science and now public policy. But there's so many ways to be an activist, either professionally or kind of volunteering into activism to advance environmental justice and to further climate action. So it's a great and important way, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, a lot of bad things come from policies, and you can use good policy to correct those mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
But there's so many other things that have to happen in between that does not necessarily relate to policy making in of itself.
Mm-hmm. So do you think that you will, do you want to be a policy maker? Is that like one of your end goals there, or not end goals, but part of it?
Yeah. So it's interesting because I'm kind of still deciding that. I think,
Mhm.
Liz, you and I, we know each other from UConn, and it might seem like we're super old and like super mature and whatnot, but we're really young. Like we're 23. Unfortunately, we graduated into a pandemic. But fortunately, I feel like that's given a lot of opportunity to really sit down and figure out, okay, how do I want to contribute to the world, right? Because that's how I think of a career. Of course, you're going to have to sustain yourself, economically, financially, and whatnot. I'm personally financially independent. So everything I do and I work for, like I have to do that for myself, right? Um,
Mhm.
but to me, what's more important is what I am getting out of the job beyond the paycheck.
Mhm.
So, how I feel when I'm at work and how I feel about the work I'm doing is very important to me. It has to be in line with my passions. I think it has to serve communities, right? So for me, furthering my career in academia, so being a scholar activist to me looks like doing my own research on how to advance policy for environmental justice, or how to advance activism for environmental justice, ultimately to like create more environmental justice, right? Solve the problems that exist now. Um, that will probably in my lifetime look like researching policies, making different policies, evaluating the progress of policies. But even completely separate from that, it will just look like researching activism and environmentalism, and researching how people respond to different aspects of environmental justice in order to ultimately create the best outcomes that make sure we don't have certain people of color experiencing more environmental distress, certain people of color being more likely to have diseases due to exposure to pollutants, being more likely to experience the devastation of climate change, right? We've seen that happen already in terms of thinking all the way back to Hurricane Katrina, or more recently with Hurricane Maria, and everything that happened in terms of the island of Puerto Rico being ultimately neglected, right? We see what that looks like even in the state of Connecticut, when certain towns like Bridgeport or Hartford, they might lose power for longer, or they don't have their heat on, and whatnot. Whereas other towns that might be wealthier and predominantly white areas are less likely to face those issues, right? Those are things I want to solve, along with other things. Like you do food justice work. Food insecurity is very much an aspect of environmental justice as well, not only because climate change will impact access to food through either, the heat making it harder to actually grow the food as the global temperature rises, or flooding, destroying food crop areas, pretty much any disruption to the food growth cycle. But also there are a lot of like explicitly kind of like racist policies that have made it the case that certain areas are less likely to have grocery stores or farmers markets or access to healthier foods, right? So all these things are problems that need to get solved. Some of them I'll do through just grassroots organizing, and doing what I can to engage in that. Other things will be through policy making, policy evaluation, and other things through how my research can contribute to both of those things. But I'm young, and so I think that's something important for everyone to know in terms of career planning. Know what you want to do in this world generally, have a vision for your future and morals to support and guide, and set the foundation for that vision, and have a general idea of how you want to like obtain that vision. So for me, it's activism in academia, right? It's being a scholar activist. But what exactly being a scholar activist looks like to me right now might not be the case in 10 years, but that'll still be how I shape my career and how people engage with me. So I think that's something, food for thought.
Yeah, definitely. That's awesome. I know it's always hard to always find a career, but I think that one will be made. I mean, there's so many that aren't made yet. And I think you are definitely paving the way for yourself and then others after you. So that's really awesome and inspiring. I don't want to keep you much longer, but I do want to show
I'm
you.
having a good time.
Yeah, I know, me too. I want to show you what we have been working on.
Sounds cool.
And maybe ask a further question after that. Okay, here we go. All right, let me know if you can see this.
All good.
Okay, so a little bit about what we've been doing at Kendall. We've been working to fight land pollution. We did some picking up litter today. Awesome. With our 5th grade classes. and we got 5 bags. I actually think we might have gotten 6 bags because this was before or after we threw one of them out. But yes, so we've been collecting trash. And we've also been working in our school garden, right? Growing our own food. Today we planted some lettuce and some spinach
Ooh,
and
yum.
some strawberry seedlings. So that's been cool. Hopefully we'll get lots of produce and maybe even be able to have some in the lunchrooms or even give some away, depending on how much we get. We've also been reusing some materials. So we went through some of the trash bags and I found a toolbox and I'm using some old cardboard here. And we're gonna make it into a little bed for more strawberries. And then today we also found some baby bunnies in our garden. So we are protecting our local wildlife. We put a little crate over there, this little nest, and don't worry, he's just sleeping. He's not dead.
Unfortunately, I'm not seeing the images that you're presenting. I'm seeing the slides, but for some
Oh
reason,
no.
I can't see the baby bunnies.
Oh, that's so sad. Let me see.
Oh,
Does it
now
work
I can.
on like this?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So there's our picking up of our litter. There are bags.
Mhm.
And our
Oh,
chemical
awesome.
gardening.
I really want to get into more gardening.
Yeah, it's been great. The kids, they're really enjoying it.
It's a great way to advance health too, and it's great for the
Mhm.
environment as well.
Yeah, and there's our little bunnies. And then I put a little question here at the end.
Mhm.
What are other ways that we can fight for our environment and for our future? So that
Mm,
was kind of thinking of what can, even though our students are, students and they're in school in
mhm.
5th grade, I was wondering if you had any thoughts on what they could do. I'll stop sharing now and come back here. But
Yeah.
they can do in their everyday life, or even if they were interested in getting involved in activism, um, what kind of things could they do?
Yeah. So I'd say there's no age limit. There's no age minimum, right? You don't have to be this tall to ride the activism rave. I think it's really a matter of figuring out what's really in line with your personal interests. So if you love being a leader, like you love talking to people and inspiring people, and kind of like being a self-starter, right? In terms of you have an idea, you want to make it happen, then that's your role in activism, right? That's figure out, get together a group of people, figure out a project that you want to do that will be good for the environment, good for your health, or good for just advancing social justice overall. And then just do that. Believe in yourself and you can make it happen. If you're more of a creative person and you want to use your art to inspire change and activism, do that, right? Make cool graphic tees, like make a cool poster, make music, make art, do anything that is a form of creative expression. That is so important, and I think often underrated in terms of what is necessary for fighting for justice and activism. Like we need those forms of creative expression.
Mhm.
If you are someone who, I'm trying to like translate people I know and then like we get into 5th grade, but um, if you are more of a like if you're more of a book person, if you're more of a learner, if you're more of an academic person, kind of like I'm like all three of those
Right.
things, right? If you're more of a bookworm, then just learn more, like
Mhm.
read more, right? Watch videos on these things, educate yourself and educate your friends, right? Don't ever shame someone or guilt someone for not knowing something, but take the time to educate other people and let them know. Have more conversations about what you can do to get involved, but figure out what's going on in your nearest environment, right? So maybe your school has a litter problem, but there's not a lot of people who want to commit to picking up trash. Maybe you can be the person that solves that problem. Say you want there to be more healthy foods available because other people don't have access to it, or you don't have access to it. Start figuring out how you can make more garden beds and do more community gardening. If you want to respond to some legislature that you hear about, which I'm not sure how often y'all hear about legislature or different policies, but kind of just like look into those things. There's no, again, there's no age limit on how you can have your voice be heard. Just make sure that you do in whatever way that is most comfortable to you. And the more people who start to do that, the more people who start to embrace their responsibility to taking care of the world and taking care of each other, the better the place will be, the more there'll be environmental justice, and the more capable we'll be to addressing climate change. But just know that everyone has a role in this journey, but that role, they define themselves. So if you feel like you know what you could do to help your community, help your peers, and help save the world, then find your people and save it with them.
Awesome. I love that. And I know I'm really glad that I can show them you. And so they have a example of somebody who is doing that exact thing and using their talents to save the world.
Yeah, let's save it together. Like there's only one. Also, respect animals more.
It's true.
Sorry, that last note. Respect Garfield.
Yes, it's true. Yes. Thank you so, so much for talking with us today and being our career spotlight for Career Friday.
Thank you for
Of
having me.
course. All right.